That's what I'm doing here. I have a lot of classes coming up over the next few months, and I'm just thinking about, I'm always trying to kind of reinvent what I do. I do a lot of razor cutting in my classes, but I also like to do some scissor cutting. And, I have this kind of philosophy that even if you're pointing and slicing and working with what we typically call freehand, it can still be precise. I don't think precision, it means all your lines have to be blunt and solid and all your, haircuts super geometric. I think precision is a way of thinking and approaching things in a deliberate way. Again, we're all entitled to our own philosophies, and I think that's what's beautiful about our craft. But for me, that's where I like to be with it. How can I be precise, meaning my sections are thought out, the angles of the sections are clean, the way that I use the tool is deliberate, but maybe the end result is meant to look a lot more freeform. So here I'm starting off with one of the most kind of simple things you can do, but also one of the most difficult, just kind of creating the baseline for a bob shape. This Josephine mannequin was previously had a lot of long razor layers in it. It had some color done to it. So it was time to kind of take it a bit shorter, in terms of getting the most out of the mannequin. I can normally get, 4 to 5 different lessons out of a mannequin. So this already had, 2 different types of long haircuts and some color. And now we're going to like the bob range here where I want to kind of bring it almost back to one length to eliminate all the texture internally and all the razor cutting, and then use a form of back cutting to create, a kind of freehand type of layering. So here you can see point cutting. I try to, kind of angle consistently. The tip of my scissor goes slightly out on this side and slightly out on the other. You'll notice I'm working through the fine teeth of the comb. So I have a little bit of stretch and a little bit of kind of forgiveness at the same time in the hair. So the fine tooth of this comb, which is actually quite fine, so it gives a good bit of tension, probably about as much as it would give if I was holding in my fingers, with not pulling the hair, but holding it deliberately. And again, I do want to stretch the hair a little bit because that'll make my lines even softer. It will create a little bit of tension and graduation. So again, that's what I mean by precision. It's not about the lines always being blunt means precision. It's about understanding and really being clear on what you're doing. Drop this last section down in the back. You'll see I have some pre-sectioning on the top, which I'll talk about in a minute. We're gonna get to that after we kind of get the bob shape in and do a little bit of the back cutting through the back here. So last section. Again, for what I want to do here, I wanted to get this back to kind of one length first because I wanted to kind of have as much weight as I possibly could have on here to then do the back cutting to reduce some of that weight. Fine teeth of the comb, a little bit of over direction back. So a little bit of over direction, a little bit of tension. Both of those things will help to create even a little bit more softness. You'll notice how subtly, as I get closer to the back of the ear, I lifted the head up. And that's like, as my body feels like it has to come around into the side, I have to make sure that the chin's not down or it'll be very hard to follow this line. The line is angled very, very slightly downward to allow for the fact that it will rise up. This won't be an extremely A-line look by the time that I'm done, but what I don't want it to do is round off dramatically. So between the way that I'm going to layer it using back cutting, the way that I'm stretching, using the fine side of the comb, having that slight downhill angle to the cutting is important. Not going in super deep with the point cutting, just into that like last ½ inch of the hair and trying to get like a consistent rhythm with it. So as I come through, I'm kind of like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then working in a small area. Now here again, making sure that the head shape goes up so that we don't round it off or lose the corner behind the ear here. Checking a little bit now, again, you can check against the skin. It's a little bit trickier to do with a mannequin, but it can be done. This will help you get any of the hairs underneath the underneath hairline that maybe because You let that hair be slightly elevated. There might be some pieces underneath. So you can kind of press down. Again, we want a textured line. That doesn't mean we just want like random graduation. So again, I think sometimes when people start to think about freehand, they think that things can be perhaps overly messy. But again, the shape won't last, it won't grow in well. So just, to me, the difference is just the quality of the lines, It's still precise, it's just whether or not those lines are kind of nibbled into or solid. Okay, so before I go into the sides, just because I'm back here and I want to kind of get into this, we're going to now do the back cutting. So you'll notice here that I've got a little bit of a horseshoe separated in the crown. And I'm going to, basically, I'm going to back cut this from the top, drop this over, blend it into the one length, and back cut it from the underneath. Very, very simple. We'll get kind of a really nice looking, semi kind of one length looking, but highly textured bulb out of this. So coming through the middle, taking my first section, bringing this out in a very traditional way at first at 90 degrees, then beginning to kind of work a little bit differently and holding it down lower so that the hair is a little bit more collapsed. Working from about the occipital bone down, opening and closing without closing all the way. And really what this does is put an extreme kind of concave. If we're thinking back to precision cutting, it's kind of similar to bringing it up here, but also kind of not similar, right? Because everything that you do a little bit different gives a different result. And I'm just one of those people who likes to do things differently all the time to keep myself interested. So first I comb it out, I can see the weight, the density of the hair, drop it down, look for this point. Don't close the scissor all the way. These are dry cutting scissors. I use dry cutting scissors all the time on damp hair. I love the way they slide and glide and break up the hair. Come through. I am going to use some over direction even with this technique. So again, with the precision of it, behind the ear here, I want to bring this back a little bit so that we don't take out too much behind the ear. You judge how many times you want to go through. I'm going through about 2 times, and that's giving me the weight release that I want. Again, behind the ear, head comes up. Over directing back at this point. Almost what we would call square. Letting the hairline drop away. And working through. Because I'm over directing and because the hairline drops away, I feel like I can still go through here pretty strongly. Again, it's up to you how much you want to go through. So here you can see this side being one length, this side having the back cut layers into it. It does change it. It can be very subtle or it can be very extreme. And that's the precision part of it that comes from you. Vertical section, straight back. Again, I know where I started. I could see one of the little short pieces from here. So there is even technical guide as well as visual. Be careful as you go along to not get more and more aggressive. A lot of times with freehand techniques, that's kind of what happens. We get more and more loose, so to speak, and then we get more and more aggressive. So really keep your eye on how much you're laying into the hair, both visually and, in terms of the effect of it, and then as you're doing it. Again, remembering to come back more squarely to protect the corner and working my way through. Last section here, and back and through. So, in precision terms, we've just kind of done a bob and then layered the bob. We're just doing it in a freehand way. So again, you can see what does layering mean? It's a release of weight, and that's what we've done there. But without a traditional kind of look to it. We still have the section on the top. I'm going to come into the sides now and cut the outline on the sides and do a variation of what we've just done here on the sides. So I just need to see where that length is. And we'll break this up into 2, maybe 3 sections at the most. Head can be tilted away from me, but I don't want the chin down. You know, I also want to really be able to dial in on what's going on behind the ear. So there's a few I'll work with the wider side of the comb now deliberately, especially right around the back of the ear and right over the ear. In this case, you know, this mannequin, this Josephine mannequin, the ears are quite flat to the head. If they felt like they were a little jumpy, I could lift the hair a little bit. But here, just using the wide side of the comb here, I think is doing more than enough for me. And then I'll finish up this front corner just right in the fingers, as this is kind of free falling over the neck. And to push it all the way into the neck, I think would do the opposite. It would under elevate. Slight angle coming through. Let's see if I can make short work of this, I will. Yeah, I can see the guideline quite clearly here. So I think I can do this all in one, especially knowing that it's going to be layered with back cutting. I'll work in the same manner. Wide side of the comb, tip of the scissor, angle forward on both sides, just for consistency. You know, sometimes you can be deliberately inconsistent depending on how much you really kind of want to break this up. I see a lot of kind of fun point cutting where people going left, right, left, right. But here I'm just sticking to a simple consistency on both sides. And I'm not really going in to create a super shredded line in any way. Making sure we keep this front corner. So Rex just ate his lunch and I think he wants water. So as Kelly gets Rex a little bit of water, let's take a look. You can see the angle coming through here. Down and slightly forward. By the time that this gets layered with the back cutting, and this will kind of begin to rise up. So more than it being an extremely angled shape, the idea here is to make sure we don't round it off. I mean, the beauty of this is that there should be a corner at the front. So really working to maintain that corner. I see a question there, Cal, could you use your razor? Yes, and I have a variation of this haircut on our HB Live platform, Hairbrain Live Academy, where I definitely use a razor. I use very similar sections and use a razor. I wanted to use scissors with this particular because I do razor so much that sometimes I feel like, hey, I need to make sure that my scissor skills don't get rusty. And that's the whole idea behind this collaboration with our friends at Pivot Point. It's about professionals who practice. You know, most of the time when I'm out teaching classes, I do a lot of razor cutting on my clients. So again, just to be, you know, honing my skills all the time, because I do like to use the scissor. It's just very often for me, the razor is very in demand. But you could definitely translate this. You know, that's another thing. To me, razor cutting can be very, very precise. Again, what does precision mean to you, I guess, is the question. If it's about the quality of the lines, to me, which is more about geometric or blunt or club cutting, but to me, precision is a state of mind. It's the way you think about your work. It's the way you break it down. It's about the control of your tools, your good habits, your understanding of hair cutting. So, you know, precision at the end can be a lot of different things. Dropping this down. Again, thinking it through. The hair behind the ear, we don't want to get a hole, so moving into the wider side of the comb, less drag on it, even just this one little piece here. Being careful with it. I think I might have been a little too careful. Let's get a closer look there, not getting enough control. It's a little bit too much. Come through, drop out that front corner, wide side of the comb again. And, you know, stick around here because after we get the line in, just like we did in the back, we're then going to add the back cutting here, which will be a big part of making this something, you know, kind of beautiful and unique. Last section. Trying to get the tip of that scissor angled slightly forward. And working through these last little pieces. Most important thing is to keep that corner at the front for this particular look.
Are you going to undercut these side pieces the same as you did the back?
Similarly. Not exactly the same, but similarly. I'm going to now get the stuff in the back out of the way. I want to keep that corner. And then I want to think about how I want to approach this. You know, again, I want to make sure I don't lose the bob line, but I want to get that kind of fun back cutting quality happening again. So I'm going to start at the front hairline. In a very similar way, I got to think about the height here. Going to first comb this out, 90 degrees, just enough for the outline to start to drop away. Take about the top half of the hair. Make sure I've got my weight in my corner here. And again, working through from about halfway through. You decide, you know, how dramatic you want this to be and how many times you want to go through.
Oh, and it would also depend on the individual's hairline and things like that, I imagine?
Yeah,
hair
it's
density?
all your analysis of how much weight you want to take out, where you want to take it from. You know, that's like your formula. Again, that's the precision. You know, if you're just picking up hair and chopping into it without thinking about why and what the effect is, well, I could see that not being precision whatsoever. But if you're thinking about it, if you know where you're starting, why you're starting there, how you're using your tool, something very different. I think for me, very modern and fun. And for my clients as well. You know, I always say I don't teach anything that I don't use on my clients. You know, I still work with clients, still have a great clientele that I love, and all the techniques that I teach are things that I use whenever I work with them. So it's got to be commercially viable for me. You know, so what is that doing? It's just skimming the surface. It's kind of putting layering on, but in a slightly different way. You know, could you just round the corner off? Yes, you could, technically. But, you know, doing things a little differently can be quite fun. It is for me. I'm going to go in a little bit more on this. You know, this beautiful Josephine mannequin has such a nice amount of hair that you can actually go in. You don't have to worry because it's kind of a little thicker on the hairline here. So I'm going to go in again right on this front piece. So I do want to get a little bit of lightness and kick out of that. Okay, now we're going to repeat that on the opposite side. Come through, vertical section on the hairline. I don't want the head too angled, kind of in a natural position. Bring this out again, first at 90 degrees, dropping away the bottom. Thinking about where we started, about halfway through, just enough to kind of collapse this a little bit. I know on the other side I had to go back through the front hairline again, so I'm just being a little more aggressive on my first pass here. Make sure I don't get to that corner behind the ear. That was over-directed away from. So, you know, there's definitely a disconnection between the temple and what's happening behind the ear, deliberately. Working through again. Getting that nice rhythm happening. Yeah, I find it very kind of fluid to work with this, what I like to call pinching, rather than kind of trapping in the traditional way between the fingers. I do it a lot with my razor cutting and my scissor cutting. It just kind of frees me up. It frees up my body position, and then it allows me to have a different perspective on the hair, which I enjoy. So again, bob line, a bit of the weight taken off the surface, nothing insanely dramatic, but just enough. I think in actual fact, in a lot of ways, it's kind of more gentle of an end result than it would be if I worked more technically. Okay, now all that's left is to work with this hair on the top. This, the goal is to have it overlap and then back cut it from the underneath. So we're gonna come all the way back to the outline, dropping it back down again. I don't want a lot of tension here. I'm using the wider side of the comb, letting it disperse naturally. And then I can even just kind of hold it in the wide side of the comb down here, giving myself plenty of room. Even a little bit below the line, giving myself room when I back cut and detail. So not really pounding it onto that baseline. You know, even if you're working with a very precise, blunt club cut bob, you'd want to have a little bit of flexibility on this last piece till after you blow dry it in style to let the hair move around. So again, informed by that same ideas of precision. you know, for me, no matter how kind of free form, wild you get in your hair cutting, you know, if you've got a strong foundation, that's the key to everything. I still very strongly believe, you know, you need to learn your ABCs. You need to learn how to be very, very technical. And then you need to see what happens from there. Some of us are happy to stay there, and some of us want to kind of go into different places from there.
If you were going to blow dry this on camera, how would you do it?
You could blow dry in so many different ways. I mean, you could use, you know, very often for me at this length and shorter, I don't really like round brushing the hair.
Too voluminous?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just looks too polished for me. Although I know there are people that can do it in a really beautiful way. But for me, I like round brushing on the longer hair typically. So I would use a flat brush or a paddle brush. Mostly I would use my hands. And, you know, I diffuse dry. Really, you can do anything. Especially because there's nothing wild here. You've got plenty of length to work with. All right, so now I need to think about where this falls and where I want to start kind of making this less blunt. I want to go again from about the middle of the occipital bone. So you can comb it out first so it's all kind of neatly organized. Then I do my transfer, then I'm bringing it down so it's collapsing together a little bit more. And now I'm going to work my back cutting on the underneath.
Do you take into consideration your previous back cutting in this back section, or
Yeah.
is it a new?
It's a new one, but I do want it, it's got to, you know, probably if the bottom was very aggressive and the top was very heavy, they wouldn't mesh together. You know, they kind of, the more they're similar, if the bottom is really aggressive, the top probably should be aggressive. Otherwise, it's, you know, my goal isn't to have a shape underneath with pieces on the top that are floating around indiscriminately. So you kind of have to, you know, make them relative. They don't have to connect, they don't have to be exactly the same, but more likely than not, they're gonna have a similar vibe. Like this one was from the middle of the occipital bone, this is from the middle of the occipital bone. Again, these scissors are designed to cut this way. They push as they cut, so they don't scrape or pull the hair. They're dry cutting scissors, so they're kind of wider at the base. You know, so I have never had any trouble with this kind of damaging or pulling the hair in any way. You'd be surprised, sometimes very kind of sharp precision cutting scissors aren't great for this because they will pull the cuticle. This kind of pushes the cuticle out because it's not that the blade is dull, it's just shaped in a different way. Instead of pulling it in, it pushes it out. So again, end result, we've got this nice kind of modernized one length look, which is exactly what I'm going for. Simple, salon friendly. I'm pivoting around the crown for this, and I'm not using any over direction on this top piece. We've got everything maintained through the bottom, through over direction. We don't need to worry about it. This is a lot more free flowing and free floating. Very important, the angle of the scissor. Notice it's almost kind of perpendicular to the hair. It's not, well, actually it's not perpendicular. Perpendicular would be this way. It's parallel to the hair. I'm sorry about that. Otherwise we'd be cutting through and it would get really, really steppy. So what we want is for the blade to be very, very parallel with the hair strand as much as possible. Sometimes people have a challenge with that. It's because their thumb. Notice my thumb is almost barely in the scissor. And I come in and I go to work. And again, only you can decide how much to go through. And you kind of have to remember how much you went through on the other side and look at it and work with it. Again, what I do find, and this is my favorite way, back to finishing, I would just finish this. There's already a little bit of grooming cream in the hair. I always like to work with some cream in the hair. And that's the way I want it to look. You know, that's why I don't have a problem cutting hair damp, because this is exactly the way I want it to look.
If your scissors aren't super sharp with this technique, would it frizz? Is it best to grab if you need to get your scissors sharpened, would it be best to grab your razor?
You know, so it's not about it's about the type of scissor. So if you've got, these are dry cutting scissor. I almost hate that they're called dry cutting scissors because I use them on wet hair all the time. But my goal with these is to not cut clean lines. The way that the blades are shaped, they push as they close. your most like sharp, precision cutting, wet cutting scissors, the way the blades are shaped, when you close it, pulls the hair in to cut it cleaner. So it's not about sharpness, it's about the shape and type of blade, more than anything. But yes, I mean, I have variations of this where I absolutely work with razor cutting. Again, dropping the side panel over, giving myself room using the wide side of the comb. And, you know, in a perfect world, this is even just, it's a loose connection. I'll use the fingers here at the front, and I will over direct. Everything's about maintaining that front corner for me here. That's what makes this look really beautiful. Again, we're going to talk about the back cutting here before I finish up the last bit. So coming in. Now I'm going to start in the back on this one, and I'm going to over direct everything to get that little bit more kick on the front. Coming through. Combing the hair. You know, it makes you comb different, it makes you think about things different, and different approaches give slightly different results. So you know, there's even like a razoring tempo here. But the idea of this whole series with our friends at Professionals Who Practice, number one, it's to show their incredible educational tools. As a teacher, I don't think I could do what I do. I know I couldn't without pivot point mannequins and tripods. I mean, I am at a stage where I prefer when I do a class to have mannequins to live models, because if I have things that I really want to teach, you can teach, you know, how to really customize and personalize on a live model. But if you're trying to teach a basic skill that no one's done before, very often you're going to run into challenges. So for me, the perfect world is we start the day on mannequins learning things like this. Okay, this I'm calling back cutting. This is how you do it. Let's practice it. Let's try it. Do it a bunch of times on a beautiful mannequin like a Josephine. Then get a live model and customize it. You know, that's to me the perfect day for education. Over directing back. I'm going to think about this front piece. You know, I think I might at this point leave it solid. As I said, this front corner is kind of really important to me, and having a little bit of extra weight on it, I think I'm going to leave that piece out right now. You can kind of see how the density there changes. It's another thing I like about the hair being damp. I can kind of keep working with it. I mean, with dry cutting, the hair would have to be flat ironed perfectly for me to be able to keep moving it around. You know, if I just let it dry naturally, I wouldn't be able to really touch it, or it'll get frizzy. So, you know, that's not why this works for me. Damp hair with a really nice kind of grooming cream in it, because that's the way I want the hair to look when it's dry. Okay, last side here. This side of the parting, we've already cut in the line. I'm choosing to start from the back so that I can over direct a little bit forward. And I've actually even left that front piece without any back cutting on it. Did we cut the length off this guy yet? No. So we're going to drop down. Same thing, loosely blending to the underneath line, even giving myself a little bit of room, because with the back cutting and this will shrink. And also the fact that it's damp. So I mean, that is one of the things, you know, when you work with damp hair, curl, wave, even straight, you have to be able to know how much it's going to change when it does dry. Even if you're not straightening it or blow drying it, it's still going to change. So another bit of kind of precision, understanding how hair changes from wet to dry. Check my balance. Feels good. Simple approach. If you've been with me from the beginning here, you saw how we started off just kind of putting in a bob line. Then we used back cutting to free that up from the top. And then again, we blended to that bob line. And now we're using back cutting more from the bottom. So it keeps the top kind of solid, great for color, great for styling, but you're getting that movement and weight reduction from the underneath of the section. And I'm looking for that Velcro effect. What that means is that the texture from the bottom back cutting and the texture from the top back cutting are beginning to mix and mingle. Right, because it's all here, and now it's all here. And if you think about Velcro, all those little pieces of short and long next to each other, when that falls into it, it grabs and twists around itself and around the hair next to it. So again, we want to leave this front piece uncut in terms of the back cutting, put the hair right behind it. This will be the last little bit that I do. I think what I can do with these front pieces is lift them and get just a little bit of kick from behind.
Jordan, we got a question from our audience. When tease cutting from the bottom of the hair, does it make the ends curve under?
It can, if you blow it. You know, basically anything that's not blunt is more moldable. So meaning, I don't think it's just going to do it on its own every day, exactly curve under. But because you've got that weight taken out, if you do use a brush or your hand to encourage it, it should be easier to encourage. See, like even if I do this, it's not just doing that perfectly on its own. I have to encourage it. I mean, what it's going to do on its own is this, which is what I want it to do. Some will go left, some will go right, some will kick up, some will kick down. But by making those ends what I like to call tapered, either with a scissor or a razor, makes them
You can
easier.
have it both ways.
You can force them easier. See how easy that was? So imagine how easy that would be with a brush and a blow dryer.